Hello, friends. I'm back with another round, and it has gotten exciting. I have not finished, but it has gotten very exciting. So, first of all, I wanted to say I have used this delightful suggestion from one of you lovely watchers to make it where you can kind of see the initials of the suspects. So I haven't done every single character, but I've done the suspects. So if you recall, we had 8 suspects last time, and I kind of added a 9th. So the suspects are Tim Allerton, Mrs. Allerton, Miss Van Schuyler, Andrew Pennington, Mr. Ferguson, Guido Richetti, Mrs. Otterton, Rosalie Otterton, and this mystery woman that was talking to the engineer is my 9th suspect. So hopefully that will help. Please let me know in the comments if you think this is a useful thing. I'm also going to try to put up an image of the boat layout when it's useful. So the first thing that I have for you today is the doctor's information about the actual crime. She was shot at close quarters with a very little bullet, like a .22, which of course is what Jackie had. She was killed while she was asleep. There was no struggle. And her finger has dried blood on it, and there's a large J in dried blood on the wall. Right. So obviously, it's meant to look like she drew the initial of her killer. Poirot right away says, take that out of your mind, because that's like the trope of the victim putting using their blood in their last breath to draw out the initials. And Poirot says it strikes him as something from the pages of the romance of crime, leading him to suspect that the killer is old-fashioned. And so that made me think, okay, Miss Allerton, Miss Van Schuyler, and Mrs. Otterton are probably the most old-fashioned people. And then of course Ms. Otterborn is a novelist and kind of a cliche one, I think. So she might be the most likely to do something like that. But also Mrs. Allerton mentioned that Tim really likes detective stories, so it's possible he's kind of living out his own detective story. So we're starting to construct a timeline now. The doctor says that her time of death was between 12 a.m. and 2 a.m. So that gives us a 2-hour time period when the killer could have struck. So I came up with kind of 2 possibilities of that whole, what was going on with Jackie and Simon. So one is kind of what I talked about before. The scene was there to distract from or to give an alibi for Jackie and Simon. So maybe that would leave a gun around that people could say, well, it could have been anybody. And then they have an alibi and so forth. Or, and this is a new thought for me, the killer didn't know that Jackie would be confronting Simon during that time and planned to frame her with the initial J and using that type of gun. But obviously they didn't expect her to then have a solid alibi. But I think that would only make sense if Jackie and Simon really aren't together and haven't been in all of this. And Jackie really is the victim of being left by Simon for her best friend. So that would throw my whole other idea out. But I actually think that it's most likely at this point that they weren't in it together, that they just think the same way, and that's why they both had the moon analogy. I don't know. At 11:20, we know that Lynette went to her room and that Simon, Jackie, Cornelia, and Jim Fanthorpe are still in the saloon. And then Andrew Pennington's there when she leaves, but he leaves within a few minutes around her, 11:23, he leaves. So Colonel Race says he for sure saw her go into her room, so there's no question about that. At 12:20, Cornelia takes Ms. Bowers to Jackie's room to watch her, and then Cornelia and Jim help Dr. Besner move Simon right after that. And then 12:30, which is only 10 minutes later, is when Jim Fanthorpe can't find the gun, and then he goes to bed. So if he was gone so up until here, Simon is still in the saloon. Simon and Dr. Besner are in the saloon. But when all four of them go to move them and him and do the surgery. And then Jim Fanthorpe says he comes back just before 12:30. That means there's only about 5 to 10 minutes that someone could have taken the gun. So they have, and it was under a settee. So they have to have known it was there. So probably someone was watching them, or it was one of the people involved, which pretty much means it would have to be Jim Fanthorpe because he's the only one that had time to go get it of the people who were involved. Then at 1 o'clock, Jim says he heard a splash as he drifted off to sleep. Maybe the gun going overboard, which would mean the murder was between 12:30 and 1. It's notable that he's on the starboard side, and so the splash he heard was on the starboard side. Oh. Ooh. I've put those way too high up and you can't see them. I am sorry. Pretty much everybody on the starboard side heard a splash. Now a question for my big readers out there, especially Agatha Christie fans. Colonel Race says, "That seems clear enough," said Race. "Unless 3 independent witnesses are lying, Jacqueline de Belfort couldn't have got hold of the pistol. But somebody did, and somebody overheard the scene. And somebody was BF enough to write a big J on the wall." BF enough. What does that mean? Educate me, my friends. They're talking about the boulder event, right? When the boulder almost hit Lynette. Poirot is able to clear Simon, obviously Lynette, Mrs. Allerton, Tim Allerton, Miss Van Schuyler, and Miss Bowers, and Jackie. Of those 9 suspects, that leaves Andrew Pennington, the Otterbournes, Guido Rossetti, Mr. Ferguson, and our mystery woman. That's just for the boulder thing, and it is possible the boulder thing could be different than the murder, but it's definitely something to consider. It's a good clue that Lynette told Simon when she saw the passenger list, which they each got at their first meal, that someone on that list's father had been wronged in business by her father, so she's afraid of them. And that's one of the things she was talking about when she told Poirot that she's surrounded by enemies. We find out who our mystery woman is. Her name is Louise Bourget, and she is Lynette's new maid. She says that when Lynette went to her cabin, she came in, undressed her, turned out the light, and went to her own room below decks. So she's one of the people that's below deck. And she was there in Lynette's room for about 10 minutes, sometime after 11. Then, of all things, we have a new suspect. His name is Fleetwood. Guess what? He's the engineer that we saw Miss Louise Bourget talking to, and he is the fiancé of Marie that got called out for having a wife and kids already. And let me tell you, he's mad. And then we find out the pearls have been stolen. Dun, dun, dun. That's right. I called it. The pearls got stolen. I was sure it was going to happen. You know, I think it's Tim, because I have the Tim Allerton conspiracy theory. If you thought I was all about the mineral water before, you have no idea. I am about the Tim is a thief conspiracy theory. I feel like it's going to be more than just Tim's a thief. I don't know that he's the murderer, but I think this is actually going to be important. I don't think this is going to go the way of the mineral water. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you need to go and watch the first one where I did Murder on the Orient Express, which was fun, by the way. So then Poirot is talking about when he saw Andrew Pennington trying to get Lynette to sign papers, and she was like reading really thoroughly, and he noticed that Simon said, "I just always sign where I'm told to, I never read it." And he thought, what if Andrew Pennington thought, I'm never going to get her to sign over whatever it is that he's trying to sneak by. But if she was gone and her husband was in control of the money, and he'll just sign whatever he's told to sign, wouldn't that be convenient? And thought, well, maybe I'll get her out of the way for that purpose. So he's kind of wondering if Andrew Pennington has a pretty good motive. Then he starts to talk to all the people, right, and see their timelines. Mrs. Allerton says she went to sleep at about 10:30, and as if in a dream, she thought she heard a splash and then running. But then she's like, or maybe it was running and then a splash. Can't remember. Sorry. Then Tim Allerton's timeline, around 11:20, which he didn't say 11:20, but that's where it works. He heard Colonel Race saying goodnight to Lynette, and then he fell asleep. He heard a hullabaloo, which was Cornelia calling Jim to come back in after the shooting. Then he heard a lot of different voices, and then someone running along the deck and a splash. And he's on the starboard side, so it's possible that he did hear the same splash as Jim. Mrs. Van Skyler is also on the starboard side. She said she went to bed a little after 10. She was awakened by the maid, Louise, saying goodnight to Lynette, and she was unnecessarily loud. Then she was awakened thinking someone was in her cabin, but it was Lynette's cabin, and it was about 1:10. Then she heard a splash. She looked outside and saw that Rosalie Otterbourne had dropped something overboard. Right about then, they find Jackie's gun wrapped in Miss Van Skyler's velvet stole that she had lost or had been stolen, and the stole had been used as a silencer. Poirot later speculates that the stole wouldn't be a very good silencer and that a .22 pistol wouldn't need a silencer because it would be pretty quiet anyway. So probably the killer isn't very knowledgeable about guns, and they're just relying on detective stories to get their information. So again, that leads me to believe it's either Tim or Mrs. Otterbourne, because they've both been the kind of like book people. Then he talks to Rosalie Otterbourne because, of course, Van Skyler kind of threw her under the bus. And she says, "Mother and I went to bed before 11. We heard a bit of a fuss outside Dr. Besner's cabin. We didn't leave the room all night. Or did she?" Then he talks to Guido Ricchetti, and he says he went to bed right after dinner, read some boring archaeological stuff, turned out the lights around 11, and then later heard a loud splash, but he was unsure of time. And the reason it was probably louder for him because he is on the starboard side, but he's on the lower deck. In fact, I think he's pretty close to being right under Jim Fanthorpe, although it's not stated explicitly. Mr. Ferguson. Oh, Mr. Ferguson. So he said, and I quote, "I mooched around by myself for a while, apparently off the ship, and then came back and turned in around midnight. Heard a cork," or Poirot says, well, could it have been a shot? And he's like, oh yeah, I guess, before he went to sleep. But, you know, he thought it was a cork because there was like, it sounded like a party going on. There were still a lot of people about. There was a big commotion. And running up on the deck above, because he's also on the lower deck, he believes he heard a splash, but he never left his cabin. Then Poirot asks Colonel Race if he thinks Mr. Ferguson could be the guy that Colonel Race is on board looking for, the murderer. And Colonel Race says, "I hardly think so," which is what I've said too. I suspect Guido Ricchetti. So then Andrew Pennington's timeline is that he went to bed sometime after 11, and then about midnight he heard a commotion outside Dr. Besner's room. But then he very clearly lies and says during the boulder thing that he was in the temple when the boulder fell. But Poirot swears that that was untrue because he had just been in the temple and Andrew Pennington wasn't there. And then Poirot decides to hatch a plan to find the thief. Not necessarily the murderer, but the thief. And so he says that at the end of lunch, they're going to announce that the pearls have been stolen and that everyone has to stay there as they search their rooms. And so then he expects that either somebody's going to freak out about it, and then that gives them a clue, or that they'll go search the rooms and find the pearls, or something else. Poirot says the most important question is, why dispose of the gun? Because if you're going to write J in blood, you wouldn't want to then throw the gun overboard. Now that Lynette's gone, Simon is very worried about Jackie. And Poirot kind of says, and it's really cute, that like now that the sun is gone, the moon is out to shine. Once more he sees the moon. But I think that he really is just that simple of a guy, and that that's exactly what happened, and that there wasn't, I mean, I really thought at the beginning that they were in on it as some kind of con, but I don't believe that anymore. But I do think they're going to get back together. This book seemed to have more like romance underneath it than the first one did, because I feel like Cornelia is kind of having a romance with either maybe like Dr. Besner, although there's a little bit of like chance of Mr. Ferguson. Poirot takes aside Rosalie to talk to her because he hears like a little snippet of something that happens in their cabin between her and her mother, and he realizes her mother's an alcoholic. So he asks her, "Did you go out to throw alcohol overboard?" So yeah, Rosalie had found her mother's alcohol stash and thrown it out. And that's what the splash was, and why Miss Van Skyler saw her at that time. So then Poirot eats with the Allertons and he orders wine, and Mrs. Allerton says, oh, that they're so very Catholic. You drink wine always. Tim drinks whiskey and soda, and I try all the different brands of mineral water in turn. So there's also still the mineral water conspiracy. It lives on. And then he stared at her for a moment, murmured to himself, it's an idea that... So I don't know if he's in on the mineral water conspiracy, but it lives on. And Tim says something about this being an unpleasant business. And Poirot said, oh, you've had previous experience maybe? You've been in a house where there was a robbery? And Tim said, no, never. And his mom said, so helpfully, oh no, dear, you were at the Port Arlingtons that time when that awful woman's diamonds were stolen. But then Tim's like, no, I wasn't there when they were stolen. I was just there when they discovered that she had fakes, like that had been stolen and fakes had been left in their place. So I think he's a thief. If I haven't said that before. I think his mom called him out in front of Poirot, which wasn't very bright. And I think that he's maybe replacing them with fakes, right? But then I was wrong, because he is not the thief. Ms. Van Schuyler is. Mrs. Bowers has the pearls, and when they go to do the search, like he has that plan, right, to find the thief, Ms. Bowers comes forward quietly, like to the side, and shows him that she has the pearls, and that Ms. Van Schuyler, like, just steals stuff, and that's why she works for her, is not really as a nurse because her health is fine, but because she stops her from stealing stuff by keeping an eye on her. And if she doesn't stop her, then she finds it because she puts it in the same place every time in her suitcase, and then she gives them back. So she was just going to give them back, but then when she found out the death had occurred, she didn't know how to give them back, and so she comes forward with that. So I did not see that coming, that Miss Van Schuyler is the thief. Are you kidding me? Okay. That was a hard hit to my conspiracy theory. I'm not gonna lie. But then I thought, what if Tim did steal the pearls, but he had lookalikes, and she stole the lookalikes? Poirot and Ms. Allerton are talking, and he asks her some questions about, like, oh, I was going to do some shopping in one of the ports. Do you know what it's like to send packages back to England? And she's like, oh, yeah, it's no problem. This is what you do. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, have you gotten any packages from England? Is that hard too? And she's like, oh, yeah. Well, Tim always gets books, but books are a different thing than other stuff because of how they go through customs or whatever. I wonder, is he getting packages with the lookalikes in them, and then maybe even sending them back out so that he doesn't have them in his possession? For like a split second, I thought, okay, I was wrong. Tim's not the thief. But I came really quick back to that. And then we find out, yeah, the pearls are imitation. And so I was thinking maybe Joanna and Tim are in it together, and Lynette figured it out, and then Tim had to kill her or something. I'm not sure. But it would make sense because Joanna was the first person to mention the pearls. She was like, hey, can I borrow them? And then Tim, could be the one who actually does the stealing. I don't know. But I tell you what I do know. Tim's a thief. Okay. Then we find out Louise Bourget, the maid Louise, she has disappeared. They were trying to find her to bring her up to the saloon with the rest, or the dining area, down to the dining area with the rest of them, so that, she couldn't run off with the pearls. They do Mr. Ferguson's room, and his clothes are all dirty and torn, but his undies and his hankies are really good quality and really nicely taken care of, and he has a signet ring. So then they search Tim's room, and he has, notably, he has a ton of books, but notably he has a half-finished manuscript. So I do feel like he's a writer, and if it's a detective thing, maybe he's living out his own story. There's lots of letters in his room, personal letters in his room, but none of them are from Joanna. And that makes me think maybe somebody, him or his mom or even Lynette had gotten a hold of those and like disposed of them or were using them to show that, I don't know, something. It's notable that there aren't any from her. And then Poirot is interested in a tube of secotine, which apparently is some kind of glue made out of fish. But I was wondering if it's used for binding books or something, and like he could unbind a book, get out a fake jewelry, then put in a real jewelry, bind it back, and send it back, like if he and Joanna are working together. They go back to Lynette's room, and Poirot is really interested in 2 bottles of nail polish. So one only has a drop or 2 of red nail polish left in it, dark red fluid. It doesn't say nail polish, dark red fluid. And it's labeled Nail-X Rose, and then the other is nearly full, and it's Nail-X Cardinal. And he sniffs them both, but then he says in French, one doesn't paint the nails with vinegar. So that's weird. Why would she have vinegar in her nail polish? I haven't actually figured that out yet. Then Poirot asks Simon if Lynette ever lent a friend her pearls, because somebody would have to have seen them really close up and like had time to study them to make a really good fake like this. And I immediately thought, he said he didn't know because they hadn't known each other that long, but like, hello, Joanna did. Yeah, Joanna did, which just leads me to believe that indeed Joanna and Tim are in on it, and the Tim is a thief conspiracy grows. So then they find Louise, the maid, dead in her room. They are like, oh, well, we can't find her, but we're going to go ahead and search her room. And she's there, dead under the bed. I don't even know that a gun killed her because that's where I stopped. I do have a theory. I mean, I'll need to know how she was killed to see if it fits with this theory, but I do have a theory. I think I can confidently say a few things. I think it was done on the boat with a gun. I can't say for sure whose gun it was, but I would hedge a bet that it was Jackie's gun. I think that Tim's the thief. He's working with Joanna. They're stealing stuff. That's how Joanna's living beyond her means. They have this like forgery jewelry network thing set up, right? And then I actually think maybe Lynette found out about it and either Tim shot her or, and this is where I really think I might have it, I think Miss Allerton shot her. Or if Tim shot Lynette, then I think Miss Allerton's going to have killed Louise. Because I think that, remember whenever they're talking about motives, her and Poirot are talking about motives, the very first motive they talk about is Poirot says, you would go a long way. You would commit a crime to save your child, to protect your child. So I think she's going to have found out about this and killed at least one of these people to protect Tim. And then I also think that Guido is the person Colonel Race is looking for. I think Andrew Pennington is the one that rolled the boulder down on Lynette, but I don't think he's involved in the murder. So that's my kind of my first guess. I need to read more. So stay tuned, find out what happens. Do you think you know who did it?